Welcome back to This is Baseball. I'm Brandon Johnson. Happy September. We have about 3 weeks left in the regular season, and with the playoffs approaching, the chatter has picked up regarding the playoffs and the format that we currently have. Obviously, a few years ago, specifically starting in 2022, the MLB postseason expanded from 5 teams in each league to 6 teams, so 12 teams total, giving the top 2 seeds in each league a first round bye. So they added a wild card series that is before the division series. So, and there's been a lot of debate about whether or not getting a first round bye in baseball is actually an advantage. And I've thought about it, and there's a couple different ways that you can look at it, both positive and negatively. So obviously you hear all the time that baseball is a sport about momentum. You got to have momentum, and you don't want your momentum to stop in baseball. And I think that's absolutely true in some factors. I think if you're a hitter that is hot, the last thing you want to do is take 5 days off in between games, because then you're afraid that your bat will cool off. But I also think, on the other hand, if you're a hitter that maybe you're going through a little bit of a cold stretch and what you really need is a day off to kind of get back in the lab and figure out what's going on with your swing and get that corrected, I think that maybe having the advantage of a first round bye and getting right and correcting some of the things that you've maybe been doing wrong as a player, I think that could be really beneficial for you. I look at it from a pitching perspective, and I think having a first round bye is only positive. I think thinking about it this way, if you're a team that for some reason you came down to the final game or 2 of the season and you had to throw out your ace or your second best starter in game 161 and 162, you're going to get a little bit of time for them to rest and reset your rotation a little bit. And you can have, in the ALDS or NLDS, you can have your game 1 starter being your best guy, where if you had to go on the wild card, maybe you're having to go with somebody that, if I had more time, this is not who I would have starting today. But so I think from a pitching perspective, you get to rest your pitchers, your starters, your bullpen, and then you get to have your best guy going in game 1 and game 2. You get to order your starting pitching rotation the way that you think will best benefit your team to win that playoff series. So, and I think that there's really not enough data yet with this new playoff format to say one way or the other if getting a first round bye gives you an advantage or disadvantage. So we've had 2 seasons of this playoff format, and out of the 8 teams that have had a first round bye, 5 of those teams lost in the division series. Obviously, the other 3 advanced at least 1 round. One of those teams that had a first-round bye won the World Series in 2022. That was the Houston Astros. I think if you're looking at it, though, if you're a Braves fan or a Dodgers fan, the Braves won the World Series in 2021. The Dodgers won the World Series in 2020 and have both been the 2 best teams in the National League record-wise since then. They've both received those first-round byes, and neither one of those teams have advanced past the division series. So I think if you're them, you're like, man, I don't know if I necessarily want to have this layoff, because it doesn't seem to be doing well for us. Now, I'm of the belief that if you are the best team with the best record in the league, that a layoff shouldn't really affect whether or not you are able to advance. I think if you're a good team, you should advance. Now, the thing about being in the playoffs, though, is you're only playing good teams now. Everybody that's there belongs there and has done the things that they need to be or that they need to do in order to get to the postseason. So it wouldn't be a cakewalk anyway. So to sit here and think a first round bye automatically equals at least a championship series appearance, I think is the wrong way to look at it. So I think if you get there and you get the first round bye, make sure you're doing the things that you should be doing in that layoff as a hitter, as a pitcher, as a coaching staff. Make sure you're doing all those things to stay warm and stay ready to make sure that you haven't gone cold. And I believe that teams are doing that. I don't think that these teams that get these buys are just sitting on their hands and doing absolutely nothing. I think that they are clearly staying prepared. But I think we'll know in the next 5 years or so whether or not this playoff format works. And I think it will. I think it works already for a couple of reasons. I think, number one, I think having more teams in it, both at the trade deadline and just in September, that are trying to get into the playoffs. Maybe they're buyers at the deadline, where in a previous playoff format they'd be sellers or they'd stand pat. You have more teams that are trying to make their rosters better. You have more fan interest on a team that maybe they're the 7th or 8th team in the league right now as far as record is concerned, and they feel like they have a shot at getting that 6th wild card spot. I think that's good for the league, for more fan bases to be tuned in through the final 60 or 65 games of the season. I know as a Royals fan, they've been kind of floating around the 5th and 6th seed in the playoffs, and if we were doing this 3 years ago, then we'd be like, man, I don't think the Royals are going to be able to get it done. They're going to be on the outside looking in. But this is giving more teams an opportunity to be part of the postseason, and I think that's good as long as we have the current economic situation that we have in baseball, where we're not on a level playing field. There's no salary cap. This is all a discussion for another time, because I think that it's something that's worth looking at and something that MLB should address at some point in the next 5 or 10 years. They should look at that and figure out a way to have everybody on an equal playing field from an economic standpoint. But I do want to get back on track here and continue to talk playoffs, because I think something that makes MLB's playoffs better than every other league, and I think a lot of people agree with this, is that it feels like every team legitimately has a shot when they get to the postseason, where you look at NBA and NFL, and those are just two sports that I pay quite a bit of attention to, so I can speak on those better than NHL or MLS. But you know that the top seeds in those particular leagues are likely going to be the teams that make deep playoff runs. That's just kind of how historically those leagues have played out, where you get that first round bye and it's huge. Or you're a 1 seed, you get to play the 8 seed in the NBA. And it's not impossible for a low seed to go on a run. We've seen it happen before, but the likelihood of it happening in other leagues versus it happening in MLB are a lot lower. I think MLB, you look and you see quite often that a wild card team or a team that doesn't have as good of a record makes it a lot further in the playoffs than a team that maybe does have a good record. And this has been happening for years and years and years. This isn't something that's been happening, for the last 2 years since this playoffs expanded. Now, because you can look literally last year, the Texas Rangers and the Arizona Diamondbacks are both wild card teams. They both had to take the longer path to get to the World Series. Now, Texas won that, but that's 2 wild card teams. The Philadelphia Phillies in 2022, also a wild card team, made it all the way to the World Series. The 2019 Nationals. You remember the Nationals? Max Scherzer, Juan Soto, Anthony Rendon, Trey Turner, and all those guys. They were a team that actually in May were like 12 games under 500 and then were able to turn it around and ended up being a wild card team and ended up winning the World Series over the Astros. 2014 Giants. The 2014 Giants, also a wild card team. And who did they play on the other side? The Kansas City Royals, who were a wild card team as well. And the Royals, you know, you could make the argument of getting hot at the right time if you want to use that argument against, if you want to use the momentum argument against this current postseason format. The Royals are that. They won their wild card game against the A's, arguably the greatest game of all time, and then continued to sweep their way through the MLB playoffs in 2014. Now, moving backwards still, the 2011 Cardinals won the World Series. Obviously, everybody remembers that series as the David Freese series, the incredible heroics that David Freese had not once but twice in Game 6. They were a wild card team. Now, this was still when there were only 4 teams that made the postseason in each league. This was right before they went from 4 teams to 5 teams. And I'll keep going a little bit here. The 2007 Rockies made it all the way to the World Series. Now they got swept by the Boston Red Sox that year. And then a year prior, the St. Louis Cardinals. Now the St. Louis Cardinals weren't a wild card team, but they won their division. I think they won 82 or 83 games and were the lowest record going into the season or going into the postseason. This was a season that the New York Mets, I think, won 96 or 97 games. They were the clear favorites to win the World Series that year, and they unfortunately ran into a Cardinals team that was incredibly hot. If you remember, that was the series where Adam Wainwright, in his rookie year, he was a closer. The closer, he filled in for Jason Isringhausen and struck out Carlos Beltran, looking to send the Cardinals to the World Series. Now, I think if Carlos Beltran would have implemented his sign stealing scandal that he had in Houston and maybe added some trash can bangers for the 2006 New York Mets, then maybe there would have been a different result for them. But, you know, that stinks for you, Carlos. But sticking with the 2006 season, the Detroit Tigers lost the AL Central to the Twins and had to go in as a wild card team. Again, made it all the way to the World Series. Lost to the Cardinals. The 2005 Astros. Now, they were a wild card team. They lost to the White Sox in the World Series. 2004 Red Sox. Everybody remembers the 2004 Red Sox. They were the team that broke the 87-year curse for Boston and winning a championship. They were the first team to overcome a 3-0 deficit. They did that against the Yankees in the ALCS, and then they beat the 105-win St. Louis Cardinals in the World Series. But let's move on to some teams that had great records or the best records or were tied for the best record in the majors and ended up winning the World Series. And I'll just go back as far as 1998. So 1998, the New York Yankees won 114 games and won the World Series. This was right in the middle of the dynastic run where they went to, I think, 5 out of 7 or 4 out of 6 World Series. But then you can jump ahead to 2001 where the Seattle Mariners won a historic 116 games and lost 4-1 to the Yankees in the American League Championship Series. Now, you could make an argument that playing the Yankees during this time was probably Seattle's downfall, but 116 wins and weren't able to win a World Series. The 2007 Red Sox, jumping far ahead, 96 wins. They were tied for the best record with Cleveland. They won the World Series. They swept the Rockies. 2009 Yankees, 103 wins, best record in the majors. They beat the Phillies. 2013 Red Sox, they were tied for the best record in Major League Baseball with St. Louis. Both Boston and St. Louis went to the World Series. Boston ultimately won that game. The 2016 Cubs won the World Series over Cleveland with a 103-win record, breaking their 108-year drought for winning a World Series. 2018 Red Sox won 108 games and beat the Dodgers in the World Series. And if we want to count this, we can look at the 2020 Dodgers and see that they beat the Rays in the 2020 COVID year. The Dodgers went 43-17 that year. And I say all of this with the wild card teams and the teams with the best records, that baseball is a great sport and has the best postseason because you can have teams that weren't necessarily the best team in the regular season come in and win the whole thing or make a run, go to the championship series, go to the World Series. Maybe they don't win it, maybe they do. But I think there's just a good mix over the last 20 plus years of the best teams in the league and maybe the worst playoff teams in the league, making it all the way to the World Series and winning this thing. So I know this is a long-winded way to say that I don't necessarily know, or I don't necessarily think that being a team that gets a first-round bye is a disadvantage, but I do think we will have a better understanding of that data 5 years from now when we have more seasons under our belt with this format. And maybe MLB sees it and they go, okay, this isn't working. It actually isn't an advantage for the two teams with best records, and they make some tweaks to it. Because I know they'll have some time over the next 3-4 years. They're going to have to negotiate another CBA with the MLB Players Association. So maybe it comes up then and they say that we don't want to do this, or maybe they expand more. I know that MLB wanted 7 teams per league to make the postseason, and the players wanted 6 because they didn't want to water down the playoffs. I don't necessarily think more teams water down the playoffs unless you're doing what the NBA does and 2/3 of the league get in. But I think 6 teams per league that make it to the postseason right now is a healthy amount, and we can reassess later. But that's all I have this week. Thank you for listening. I will see you next week.